Okay, would you stand with me as we read from the Gospel of John? John chapter 15, starting in verse 1. I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it'll be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. Amen. Please be seated.
Thanks, Caitlin. Is it just me, or do I feel like I have a vibration?
You have a vibration.
Okay. I feel like one of the Avengers walked into the room.
Is it catching?
Well, good morning. Happy Sunday. If it doesn't make any sense to you, we took down a monitor over here and then moved all the chairs over here. It might make sense, well, if the monitor's over here, why don't we have the chairs over here? But if we did, we would lose this entire side in availability to see. And so if we angle this one this way, so as odd as it feels, this is the best that we've got right now so that you at least have a chance to see the monitor. If you can't see, you can always turn your chair around and look at this one back here. Or you could watch the video online as we're teaching, and it will be right there. About a 6-second delay, I think, on that one. So that'd be a little tougher, but we'll be like this for a couple more weeks. If you want to know what we're doing, come to the annual meeting next week, and we'll talk about what's taking place. We'll try and give you a little bit of vision of what we're doing. But when we tore this room out, and it felt so much more open, as like, why didn't we do this a long time ago? So ultimately the plan, though, is to rotate our church so that it's facing this direction, and we'll explain more about what the plan is next week. So, and again, if you are having a hard time seeing, you can get here earlier and sit here. There's a couple of open seats. But we are kind of excited about the changes. How many of you got a waffle this morning? Anybody get a waffle? Come on, there were more gone than that. All right, so thanks for those of you who are helping with the waffles. Mr. Ego made them, it's fun to do that. Judy's actually home, not feeling well, so Judy, I hope you're watching, and thanks for organizing the waffles. And I think the next thing coming up is we're going back to Pop-Tarts after a year and a half, so we'll have a runoff between Pop-Tarts and waffles. If you're looking at the screen and somebody said you have a typo, I don't. I don't have a typo. It is supposed to say the life of faith for a reason. And yes, there is supposed to be a cow right smack in the middle. When Judy was putting the slides together, she wondered if I had made a typo on it, and then she said, do you know there's a cow right in the middle? Yes, I did know there was a cow there, right there in the middle, cute little Bessie. So. In terms of the sermon today, it is about how our faith life works. And so I'd like you to keep in mind that there's 2 F's there for a purpose, and we'll try and figure out what those 2 F's are. I think it'll be clear as we go along. Our text, it should say John 15. It says John 5. So that's on my finger editing. That text, John 15, if you turn there, there's 2 really long sections of Jesus' words in the Gospels. There's the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew, and then there's John 14, 15, 16. And this section is actually a little bit longer if you just want to saturate in some things that Jesus had to say, and where Matthew's Sermon on the Mount is early in his teaching, and he's teaching his disciples some things. John 14, 15, 16 is at the end of Jesus' ministry, and he's trying to communicate some things about how faith will be and life will be and how to be successful in your pursuit of your faith. When I was 15, I went to camp and met Jesus at Malibu Camp up in Canada, and came home and joined into a discipleship group that Jerry was running, and the first assignment was to memorize John 15, the chapter. Now to you that might not sound like much, but as a high school kid I thought, well, there's other things I would rather do. But I did memorize it, and it almost entirely has stuck with me and has been a piece of text that I go to often in trying to grapple with my own faith and understand what it means to follow the Lord. We're going to talk some about it, but if you've not read through the chapter of John 15 in recent times, go read it. It's a very clear communication about successful faith. The text, I'm going to just read it for us to get started here. It says, I am the true vine, my Father is the gardener, cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes. When I memorized it, it's the NIV, but when they changed it, it said he trims clean. He cuts the branch clean so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the words I've spoken to you. Remain in me, as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, and you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. Now, when you're reading, one of the things to try and do is, instead of just kind of breezing along, is try to go, okay, well, what is Jesus talking about? And what sort of imagery is he using, and for what purpose? What is he trying to get us to understand? And it's clearly metaphorical when he's talking about vine and branches and connections and all those sort of things. Many of Jesus' analogies that he used, things to help us understand, have to do with growth and plants and farming and those sorts of things. And that's because the society they lived in, very agrarian society, they understood how plants and things work probably better than we do. But when you think of what we just read, you might go, well, what's that about? Well, it's talking about just Jesus as the vine and us the branches. So we're connected to Jesus, and we need to stay connected to Jesus. And that's an important message. But I'm going to contend that if we look at this text, we might see that it's actually containing something different than just that analogy, just that metaphor of stay connected to Jesus. So if the text up there, you can't probably read it all, and because we only have one screen, it's a little harder to see. But I put the whole John 15, 1 through 5 up there, and nothing's going to stand out to you until I skip it forward one, and I want you to see how many times one word shows up in those 5 verses, and that word is fruit. The word that Jesus is focusing on is fruit. He's using an analogy to help us understand how we operate, that we have to be connected to Christ in the same way a branch has to be connected to a vine, but his point isn't that. His is a set of statements that carry an expectation with them. He's trying to communicate an expectation, and that expectation is that we as followers of Christ will bear fruit. That there actually is a product that's supposed to happen because of our faith. That faith is not simply a zero-sum game that I have faith, I'm done, I'll go to heaven, yay. That's not it. What he's wanting his readers, and at the time his disciples, to understand is that there is a purpose in your faith that is larger in many ways than your personal salvation, your personal happiness, your relationship with Christ. And that is that it's supposed to produce fruit. Out of your life should come fruit. He doesn't tell us what that is. But if we read further on in John 15, it says that he's talking to his disciples, you did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you. He's looking at his disciples and he said, look, you need to understand, you didn't join up with me. I actually handpicked you for a purpose. And that purpose is so that you might go and bear fruit, fruit that will last. When you get done reading John chapter 15, if you walk away from it and just think that the teaching was stay connected to the vine, that's an important teaching, but it's a teaching that was designed to show us how it's actually going to work. If you're going to follow Jesus Christ, you should have more than an expectation that I have faith. You should have an expectation that it will produce fruit. So I put up a picture here of fruit on a tree, because when a tree grows to the place where it's mature, a fruit tree, it will produce fruit. I imagine if Jesus had lived in the Pacific Northwest, this analogy would have been pine cones instead of fruit, because this makes sense in that environment. But in his environment, they were very tied into our life is dependent on the products that naturally happen from the system of earth. Fruit grows on trees. We eat that fruit. It's a system that was designed. Us as followers of Christ should produce fruit. But in the very next chapter, Jesus continues on in his teaching and says, in this world you will have trouble. So there's not just fruit on the trees. He's expanding his teaching to say there's more to it than just that you're going to have fruit. You're also going to have difficulty. In this life, following me will not simply produce a bowl full of cherries. You won't just be a follower of Jesus Christ and you will be handed a bowl of fruit. You're going to have trouble. Now, we've done sermons in the past, and we'll, I'm sure, do them in the future about what it means that we'll have trouble, but he's strictly, at this point, making a clarification. Don't expect the fruit without the trouble. So for me, cows in the fruit pasture represent trouble. Have you ever hung out with a cow? I haven't spent a lot of time around cows, but enough to know they do cause trouble. They leave trouble. The extent of my cow experience has to do with walking through a field where there were no cows at the time, or I wouldn't have been there. So I didn't know as I walked to be careful until it was too late. And cows don't leave little trouble, they leave big trouble. Dogs leave little trouble. Cows leave big trouble. And in the analogy of the agrarian world, cows leave fertilizer. Fertilizer does what? It makes things fertile, right? It causes growth. When I was walking through the cow field, pun intended, it was caused growth, not growth. Because I remember like it was yesterday, the sensation stepping through grass into fertilizer. And what that felt like. And I won't go into it. 2 weeks ago, I talked about cleaning some of my pipes out. If you were here for that sermon. My friend Charles was sitting over here. Charles, if you don't know, Charles had a mild heart attack and was in the hospital last week. So I got a phone call, and Charles was in the hospital, so I stopped what I was doing, and I went down to see Charles. Charles was just out of some tests and laying in a hospital bed with many hoses connected to him. He was 92% sedated. And I walk in and say, hey, Charles, how you doing? He said, all right. And the next thing he said, after having a heart attack and being 92% sedated, was, when you told about the pipes, I almost vomited. Clearly set an impression on him that while he's post-heart attack and nearly gone and had 100 other things that are much more important, what was in his mind when he saw my face was, last time I saw you, I wanted to barf. So I'm not going to go any further into what it's like to step into fertilizer, because it's really not the point, but you can imagine. But good fruit requires fertilizer. I didn't know this. Now, when we look at what fruit is, for the fruit of the light, this is Ephesians, consists in all goodness, righteousness, and truth. In Ephesians, the previous part of that, so you understand it, says, for you were once darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. So at one point you were dark, and now you're light. And that light, the fruit of that light should be goodness, righteousness, and truth. That's not the extent of what fruit is, but it gives us a little window into what fruit is, because I think that we tend to think, oh, fruit will mean salvation of others. Fruit will mean productive ministry of some sort. I've heard many sermons and many kind of rah-rah at ministry events where you need to go out and produce fruit, as though fruit is an exterior product. And I find in Scripture that fruit is an interior product. That the things that happen out there are really God's purview. What happens in here is the fruit that we're looking for: goodness, righteousness, and truth. But where does that come from? Where do those goodness, right now, you know, the fruits of the Spirit, I chose to not put it up here, but same thing, you know, what are the fruits of the Spirit? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, you know, all those things, internal characteristics of my heart. Fruit. Where does it come from? In this world, you will have trouble. I believe as I read through Scripture that the vast majority of the fruit of change in me comes from this statement: in this world, you will have trouble. I planted a garden 2 years ago. I had a little space in the backyard. I thought, well, it'll be fun to grow some carrots and some corn. So I planted some. Drove up to Fred Meyer's and bought a little 69-cent, or probably $1.89 now, I don't know, but a little packet of seeds for carrots, a little packet of seed for corn. Dug some holes, planted it, realized, and then I was committed. I got to go out and water it every day. And I did. Every day, I would go out and water it in the morning, sometimes at night, because I knew plants need water. After a few weeks, things had sprouted up in the little tops of the carrots, you know, the little things, what do you call it, the green part that you don't eat. The rabbits do, but we don't. They were growing up, they were a few inches tall, and I thought, I'm going to pull one up just because I'm curious. I'm not a good waiter, meaning person who waits. I've never waited tables, no idea if I'm good at that, but I don't wait well for that. I wanted to know, so I pulled one up, and it was maybe 1.5 inches long. So I was like, okay, it's too early. I got to water those babies some more. So I watered them. We went on vacation for a few days. I paid somebody to come in and water them for me. Got to be August. I looked up on my phone. When do you pull carrots? August. It actually said a period of time that I had to do the math, because you don't just pull them up in August. It depends on when you plant them, but it was the period of time. So it was at the time. It's time to pull them. So Judy and I went out, very excited. Got our gloves, pulled our carrots. The biggest carrot could have substituted as a body double for any of my fingers. They tasted good. A couple of them were tumorous. A couple of them were almost non-existent. But you can see in the bowl down there when they cleaned up, they, other than, well, they don't look that good. But they tasted okay. My neighbor gardens extensively. Vegetable gardens. She brought over that same year, I think, to embarrass me, a head of lettuce that was the size of a beach ball. Oh, we have some extra lettuce. Would you like some? Sure. I swallowed my pride and I said to her, Colleen, nice lettuce. I grew some carrots. I'd offer you some, but you wouldn't want them. Why did this garden of carrots produce mini carrots? So she said, what'd you use for fertilizer? I said, H2O. She said, no, seriously, what did you use for fertilizer? And I said, no, I'm serious. You have to fertilize. Why? So she gave me about a 20-minute lesson in fertilizer and what I need to do if I want sizable carrots. It never was in my mind that God would underprepare the soil to grow something that He's responsible for growing, right? I mean, I didn't add any cells. It's all, God holds everything together. It didn't make any sense to me in my processing out until I thought about it in terms of everything else in life. Nothing comes easy. Nothing comes easy. On purpose. This is one of the things that's weird when you get to know God and you think, oh, well, God, it makes some sense to me. He's God. He could make things easy, and He could, but He doesn't, which I'm disappointed in. Growth requires fertilizer. Now, so you understand what fertilizer is. There's chemical fertilizers that artificially create poop. That's what my neighbor said I need to use. She said, no, don't buy bags of granules. I said, really? Why? That seems so easy. She said, it is. But your carrots, if you want carrots you want to eat, you need to put, and she gave me a combination of steer manure, I think chicken manure, and some other manure. But I said, I want to eat them. This makes no sense to me. It just is. If you want good food, mix it with manure. No, not in your cooking, but in your prep. I don't want anybody coming back and say, I tried this, Dave, it didn't work. Romans says this, we glory in our suffering because we know that suffering produces perseverance, and perseverance character, and character hope, and hope does not put us to shame. In case you don't catch thematically, I'm going to use yellow for fertilizer and red for fruit. Suffering is fertilizer. If you don't know that, once a year, my neighbor on the other side has a dump truck deliver natural fertilizer for their gardens. Yes. You don't need to see the truck show up to know the fertilizer has arrived. Permeates the neighborhood. Suffering does the same thing. Suffering permeates the neighborhood. If you don't know that, there's a few people here in church that I would like you to speak with. Because we have had a high level, particularly of medical suffering in the last few months here. I'm super excited to have the Moody's. I don't like to call people out in service, except I do. And they've been sick and in the hospital. And I'm guessing if we had a chat with them, the level of not fun was significant because of the illness. I had the flu just before Christmas. And I mention this from time to time. Every once in a while, when I've been well for too long, I think, man, It'd be good to get sick for a couple days. Sit at home, watch The Price is Right. That's a childhood memory. Price is Right was always on right before Let's Make a Deal. I love staying home sick. And that's what's in my mind. And then the flu shows up, and I realize that was a stupid idea. But I had the flu, which is big suffering. It's not sniffle cold suffering. It was nasty. And that would be fine, everybody gets sick once in a while. But prior to me being sick, Judy was sick, not with the flu, just with a cold. And then I got the flu, and then Christmas came. And then after that, I got sick again. To which I said, Lord, once was good. And then Judy got sick again. So we have this little ping pong game of sickness going on. And if I'm honest, I would rather not be. And you could go, well, that's not really suffering. I disagree. Suffering is relative. Pain is relative. I've had kidney stones. So when somebody tells me that they had pain, I just smile and laugh. But it's relative. One of my friends here just said, have a baby. Well, A, can't, but somebody that I know that's had kidney stones and had a baby said I would have a baby before I'd have kidney stones if were given the option. Because at least the baby comes out in a contained period of time. After that, I can't speak to it. But I have a friend who had kidney stones who blew their knee out skiing. Not at the same time. So I asked him about it. I said, because I'm trying to get a little grid on pain here. And I said, kidney stone seems to be at least to the top of the chart. And he said, well, it was for me too until I blew my knee out. He said, if given the choice, I'd take kidney stones over knee blowout. When I had kidney stones, there was nothing else in the world that mattered. Level of suffering. When I had the flu, there was nothing. I wasn't really, I didn't lay on the couch going, some people have it worse than me. I didn't care. Suffering's relative. But we glory in our sufferings. There's an entire different sermon to talk about what it means to glory in our sufferings. I don't glory in them based on how I initially read that. But what I do notice is that it says our sufferings produce perseverance. There's a product, there's a fruit that comes from suffering, perseverance. And that perseverance leads to character, and that character leads to hope. So our fertilizer is suffering, and the product, the fruit that comes from it, these are the two F's, fertilizer and fruit. In faith, both are required. What God knew when He set up this system is that for us to get deep in our relationship with Him and our ability to relate with each other, we have to go through suffering. We have to. I was visiting Mark Brighton, his dad, suffering. He's in the hospital right now. And he has a little bit of cognitive issues, and then he had another thing. But so anyhow, he went into the hospital, and he's up in Burien Hospital. And so I went up to see Mark and his dad. And Mark was telling me what was going on. And what I was able to say through a couple of conversations and a couple of texts, I think was more relevant. However helpful it was, you'd have to ask him, but it was more relevant because what he was experiencing, I had gone through with my dad. Exactly what he was going through, I had gone through with my dad, and I remember how hard it was. And I remember what I needed from other people in that time. If I had never had that pain, if I'd never walked that path, I would have been much less useful to Mark. The fruit of my suffering shows it in my understanding and a level of compassion that can then manifest in my relationship with other people. So to get the fruit, to get usefulness in your own life and others, the fertilizer, the suffering has to happen. It's not a fun message. It's not something that I'd like to think, I'd like to suffer more. This is why God doesn't ask us. You ever been just sitting there praying and God said, hey, you feel like suffering? I've never had Him say that. I've never had God check in with me ever about what I need. He knows what I need and allows it to happen. Because while I would never make a choice to go through with my dad what I did, I would want someone to have done it so that they could have been helpful for Mark when he's doing it. If that's the only reason. I don't believe it is the only reason, but if it's the only reason. Now, when we're talking about suffering, I want to move out of, just for a minute, out of physical suffering. I told you about my pipes issue a couple of weeks ago. Shortly after those pipes backed up, I got a phone call that said, I have another home that I have another home, and the phone call was the water heater's gone out. I was like, okay, that's fine. But it's about $1,500 to replace a water heater. All right, okay, Lord, it's your money. When I say that, I don't really mean it. I conceptually mean it, but what I mean when I talk to Lord, well, it's your money, is I'm saying, I think you're using it poorly, but it's up to you. So the water heater went bad. The day we got back, we were gone for a couple days. The day we get back, she's driving my car to the church, and she sends me a text and said, 8 emergency lights just went on in the dashboard. 8? Usually just get one little beep. 8 different things, she said, and I could barely drive it up the hill. I was like, oh, okay. So I took it into the dealership, and the dealer called me the next day and said, you have some wires that are bad. Now, I paid for a electrical warranty because the person said, there's only one warranty you want to buy on this car, and it's the electrical one because there's thousands of dollars of electrical stuff in here, and if one thing goes bad, it'll pay for itself. So I paid for the electrical warranty, but he said, your warranty won't work. I said, this is always what happens. But he said, no, the reason why it won't work. The emergency lights are coming on because some rats crawled up on top of your engine and made a home there and ate through the wiring. And I said, what? How does that work? It's not enclosed? No, it's not enclosed, and he gave me some sort of reason that I'm not sure was true, but he gave me a reason why it's not enclosed. But he said, but here, we've had this happen. And I said, oh, what happens often? He said, well, you'd be surprised. The reason is that they make the housing on the wiring, Honda does, out of a food product. They use, and it was either corn syrup or cornstarch or corn something. They make on an automobile made out of metal and plastic a food unit that covers thousands of dollars worth of electronics. Who do I complain to about this? I don't. I just paid for it, and I was like, Lord, I still think you're not using your money wisely. 2 days later, it froze outside. You guys were here. I went into the shower. I had a remodel done a couple of years ago. It hasn't frozen since then. I went in, I got out of the shower. I had to get to a meeting. We were going to visit somebody. I turned the cold water on, and it didn't come out. It's like, oh, that's not good. So I turned the cold water on the other one, and it didn't come out either. It took about a quarter of a second for me to realize it's cold outside. There's no water running through the pipes. This can't be good. So I go outside, and I take the part of the house apart that these contractors that I paid money to recontract my house go, okay, it's got to be in this is where the pipes run. Sure enough, I pull the bottom off of that piece of the house, and they put the water pipes in, and they put no insulation on them. These are exposed pipes. They're only closed in by a piece of a little wood box, and they put no insulation on them. And so, yeah, it's not good when you turn your water on and no water comes out when it's freezing outside, because what that means is your pipe's froze, and that's bad. So I said, Lord, I think you're using your money wrong. And I could go on, but I won't, because here's the thing. Whether it's illness, which I feel like I've had my share in recent times, but then I look at other people and I go, well, they've had worse, or it's things that are like rats eating wires that are made out of food and things like that. And what I was finding was happening in me was just this turmoil. I wasn't blaming anyone. I didn't have anyone really to blame. It's not like I was like, oh, God's just up there having fun. But this turmoil that was going on until I thought, how am I supposed to handle this? What is supposed to be, as a pastor of a church, I don't have to tell anybody these stories, so that part doesn't really matter. But as a follower of Christ, what's supposed to be happening when it seems like this series of unfortunate events keeps happening? And this is when I thought, this is what the Bible's talking about. In this life, you will have trouble. I'll have suffering, but it produces these other things. Only if you let it. Only if I let it. As long as I spin on it, this is unjust, this is unfair, this is a bad use of money, too many things have happened, I've been sick too long, my people have been sick too long, blah, 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 blah. You could write a song. Or I could say, Lord, what are you trying to do? Not what are you causing. I don't believe that God's up there causing. I think he does sometimes, like, oh, I'm going to use this. But what are you trying to do in me with all of this stuff? You're clearly not trying to just make me frustrated. You're trying to make me more mature. You're trying to make me deeper in my faith. You're trying to produce fruit in me. But I have to pursue the fruit. See, Hebrews says this, no discipline. This word discipline doesn't mean like a spanking. This word discipline means controlled events. For a disciplined approach to eating means that I'm very careful about what I do. A disciplined engagement with my friends is I'm careful about what I say and how I interact with them. The discipline this is talking about isn't that God, very few of us could really relay, God really disciplined me. He gave me a 2-hour timeout in the corner. What God does is he impresses into you fertilizer. You remember Paul when he's talking and he's like, man, I've been shipwrecked, I've been lost at sea, I've been sick, I've been beaten. He's impressing into Paul fertilizer. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. See that word harvest? It's using the same sort of cultural system to describe fruit. What is the fruit? It's not saved souls. It's righteousness and peace. And if we go through the scripture, and we're not, just for time, I'm not going to do it today where we put up a whole bunch, but if you go through and look at the things that you're supposed to harvest inside of you, they are all character things. It's one of the things I used to love Calvin and Hobbes, because every once in a while there'd be a little sketch where Calvin would be whining and complaining about something, and his dad would inevitably say, that builds character. That's what he was talking about. You're a little kid. It doesn't make sense now. Adults read the comic, and why they got it and it was endearing and they thought it was funny is because, yes, you have to go from being a child to an adult, and to do that, you've got to grow up. You're going to have a harvest of maturity from these disciplines that God is going to put into you, from these fertilizers that God is going to put into you. What am I supposed to be learning? So when I go through my thing, Lord, what did you want me to learn when rats ate my wires because they put food there? Well, first of all, not to blame the clerk that's checking me out. Not that person's fault, because I did sort of start to say, can you explain to me why they use food in an engine? And then I was like, well, this person, it's not their fault. Not to go, well, Lord, you could use your money better. What God wanted me to learn, and I'm still learning, is to moderate what's going on in my heart. To think about how would Jesus want me to respond to this. To spend time going, Lord, I feel my blood pressure going up, and I know it shouldn't, because I trust you. My mind is spinning around what ended up being a fairly sizable amount of money for a series of different things, and realizing, Lord, you did provide me the money for all of those things. And I can't recall that I said thanks. I know people who, if they had one of those things happen, it would have train wrecked them financially. Lord, that you provided, not because of anything other than you just provided. It's hard to be grateful for loss until I realize my gratefulness needs to be that God is God, and He's using bad things, fertilizer, to grow good things, character traits, in me, if I will let Him. If I will spend time going, what am I supposed to do here, Lord? You ever had a difficult relationship? Difficult conversations? It's so easy to start thinking about, well, I don't like this person, or this person's mean to me, or they're rude, or they don't try to understand me, or blah, 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 blah. Instead of go, Lord, how would you have interacted with them? What would you have done if this person said this rude thing to you? It's so easy to get stuck in my entitlements. I have a right to this. They should treat me better. From a spouse relationship down to the most casual of friendships, what I have found for me is if I don't consciously shift from selfish to caring, I stay selfish. What can I get out of this? What am I not getting out of this? What is happening against me here? Instead of how can I come back in? This is ultimately the end of marriage relationships if they don't get past that. They hurt me. They don't think about me. Now, I want to be very careful. There are abusive relationships. I'm not talking about that. Regular, normal relationships go bad because we don't grow up and learn how to care. We don't grow the fruit in our lives of these things. We don't have a harvest in our life of these things because we didn't let the fertilizer grow us there. So in me, when something comes along, what I'm trying to learn is, Lord, I want to take your discipline, difficult things, and slide it across to my heart. Say, what are you trying to build in me? What are you trying to build in me? Because I want to be more next week than I am this week. It doesn't mean that you can't ever say you hurt my feelings, or it doesn't mean that you can't ever be disappointed in outcomes, but what you take those and turn them into is what you do with fertilizer in your backyard. If you just leave it on the surface and you step in it, bad. If you mix it into the ground, it produces life and growth and health in a way that doesn't make any sense to me, but that's what it does. This part in Hebrews where it talks about discipline, earlier it talked about Jesus, that during the days of Jesus' life on earth, he learned obedience from what he suffered. This is Jesus. This verse stumps me, but I know that it's true. Jesus Christ, the Savior of all mankind, learned obedience through suffering. How can we expect to do any less? If that's what it took for Jesus, it's what it's going to take for us. And this is why John 15, not John 5, says, remain in me as I remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. If you take a branch and just stick it into fertilizer, it will not grow. But if you've put the fertilizer through the vine to the branch, it will grow fruit like it's supposed to grow fruit. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. The two F's of faith, fruit, what we're hoping for, and fertilizer, what we don't want, is this juxtaposition, this combination of how the bad turns into the good. Only with followers of Jesus Christ. It's the only place that it happens. What it requires of you and me is to hit pause when the bad's happening. When the fertilizer truck backs up, you hit pause and go, God, what are you doing? What do you want from me? What do you need to grow in me? And then for me to say, that fruit is what I want, not that fertilizer. So Lord, I'd ask that you'd help us understand this. I admit, even preaching it, it's hard for me to get. I wish you'd just send me a note, do this different. And instead, you choose to use difficulty to grow faith, to grow character, to grow a heart that is a heart of flesh, to replace my heart of stone. I'd ask you, Lord, for each person here, that you would help us begin to identify the fertilizer and work to turn that fertilizer into fruit. In Jesus' name, amen.